We have two experts standing by to discuss this. We have political analyst Rina Shah in the US, but first we're joined by freelance journalist Jamie Smith-Mayet from Tours in France. Welcome both of you to the News Hour. Jamie, I just want to start with you. Of course, the summit being held in Brussels right now with all member states there. Is this optics, or do you really feel that there will be some substance that will come out of this summit?
It's certainly hope that there will be substance, and that probably comes from the speech that was made yesterday by Macron, his address to the French nation here, preempting the discussions that would come today, and also in which he mentioned that Russia has become a threat to France and also to Europe. Preempting as well talks today, we heard about the Rearm Europe plan that had been set out by Ursula von der Leyen of basically boosting defence mechanisms up to 800 billion. And what we're just hearing there, what we just heard from your correspondent in Brussels, is it looks like overall, in terms of defence strategy, there does seem to be much more consensus right across the bloc. But there is still a question mark, notably with Hungary, over the strategy for Ukraine. So it does look like from the talk in the last few weeks, there is a movement towards action at a European level. However, there will still be questions at a national level, because ultimately the spending that's being put forward will depend on individual member states still agreeing to up their spending in one way or another by reducing it from budgets from one place to another or increasing spending elsewhere.
Jamie, to hold that thought on spending, I just want to bring in Rina right now. And when we think of the US and Washington, of course, what happened in the Oval Office is so fresh in everyone's minds. And of course, the President Zelensky himself. How do you think the US will be looking at an emergency summit there, convened with all members and, of course, following Macron's speech last night?
The Trump administration is certainly looking at what's going on right now with Europe with great glee. This was always part of the plan, to force NATO countries to do a bigger spend, to force Europe to be more active, to force Europe to do more than the United States. So in essence, what the Trump administration sees playing out is their plan all along. This was part of the pressure campaign that many Republicans wanted Trump to put on other world leaders. So sitting in this moment, I think when we, again, remember that exchange in the Oval Office between those, not just two men. Let's not forget the outsized role that Vice President Vance had there, pushing on Zelensky to be more grateful. What we're looking at was that emotional, jarring moment that leaves the door open to anything happening. And I think, in essence, it is right where Washington wanted to see those in the other hemisphere.
Interesting. Rina, do stay there where you are. I want to go back to you, Jamie. There are question marks, of course, about what will happen, of course, now on Ukraine, if Europe can actually really rally together. If we do get that unity on where Europe can really fill in the gap for the US, how quickly can the EU move? Because just yesterday, intelligence was said to have been stopped by the US. That's huge, and also aid and also funding.
Absolutely, and it's at a time when haste, as you were saying there, is more than needed, seemingly, on the part of Ukraine in any case. In terms of an intelligence, it was mentioned today that Macron for France would continue sharing intelligence with the rest of Europe in the bids to support Ukraine. But how quickly can things move? Well, that's the tricky thing with Europe. What we can say is, looking back, is things have moved very quickly in terms of strategy in the last few weeks, with the summits being held in London, also in Paris prior to that, the emergency summit today. Going forward, however, these are figures on the table. And as I said a moment ago, this will really depend upon individual nations and how they will figure out their own defence budgets. The other tricky issue here is Europe simply doesn't have the weapons at hand for investing in and supporting its own defence military. So there's a big talk here on the table as well of how to increase machinery and manufacturing in the months and weeks ahead. So there is no immediate solution, and certainly not as quick as Ukraine would probably hope going forward.
Rina, I want to come back to you and just ask you about your sense of how alone Europe is right now.
Indeed, Europe is alone because the United States in general wanted us to make Europe feel that way, that we are not your protector. We don't owe you anything. We've been pulling our part of the deal for so very long. It's now your turn. If you ask the average American voter that supported President Trump's re-entry to the White House, they will say that this activity, this sense of urgency that Europe is now feeling was something that is very good. It's something that is very good. And that is where Trump comes back to this entire notion that he has this mandate from the American people to act. It is a stark contrast to what the Biden and Blinken duo was doing in leadership for quite some time. What was all the diplomacy for when it didn't lead to action? So sitting in this moment, this action, though it may feel quite cruel. And look, it's important to note here, there are two different camps of Americans, and we do, as many people know, have two major parties here. So you've got the Democrats saying that pulling back intelligence from Ukraine is cruel, and the cruelty was always part of the point of this Trump administration. Then you have those, again, who support the America First policies that Trump says he's putting forth, and those people say, well, this is our way of forcing the hand of Europe to do more, to take on a greater, more outsized role in protecting one of their own, or rather a nation that is closer to their borders than to we here in these United States.
And Jamie, I see you nodding there. Do you also, do you think Europe is alone, and has this decision by the US actually really kick-started the EU, excuse me, into action, forced their hand, as Rina said?
Yeah, nodding away, because that's really in many ways a sort of consensus we've heard here across political circles in recent weeks, and notably also since the Munich Security Council, that Europe has to improve and boost its own defence spending. This whole discussion, however, is not completely new. This has been part of discussion across Europe in certain parties, notably sort of centrist and right-wing parties across Europe for a number of years. Macron has often supported the idea of improving Europe's security and defence spending. What has happened recently is just the change in strategy across the pond, in Washington, notably in the last few weeks and the last few days as well, which has really boosted this whole question around defence spending and security. And that's where there will be this need for increased solidarity within Europe. And we're hearing actually from some leaders that there's perhaps more consensus around security and defence in Europe on this topic specifically than perhaps on a whole host of other issues where Europe remains very divided. And then even within each state, in France, where I am, obviously, the political situation is also still very divided. So there is a hope for a wider consensus that will trigger this boost for defence and security in the weeks ahead and the months ahead.
Rina, I want to go back to you. I'm going to pose the same question to both of you. It's nearly a week now since the showdown there in the Oval Office. Where do developments go next, do you think? It's on the cards now, another meeting between the US and Ukraine. It's going to happen in Saudi Arabia. What will happen there? What will the tone be, do you think? What will Zelensky's tone be? What will the US's tone be?
Something I've noted about Trump is that he now, in the twilight of his life, he believes in second chances. And I actually do think he was willing to give Zelensky one in the Oval Office that day. And it got emotional and devolved because of Vance's tone there. Vance sort of gunning to kind of make that point that Ukraine should be grateful. Vance wanted a moment also that Trump seems to like as well. It's to show the American people that we will hold accountable those who take from us, and we will make them kneel when we want them to kneel. That is the goal of both the gentlemen, President Trump and Vice President Vance. I don't think they will stop with that tone, but maybe they will allow a reset here because, look, there's a win-win here. If they're able to broker peace to get Russia to stop its invasion into Ukraine 3+ years later, and they're able to get this key minerals deal with Kyiv in Ukraine, then Trump-Vance ends up looking like a really successful administration right at the jump of 4 years at the start of this administration. So I do think the art of the deal that Trump always talks about is on full display and will be on full display in Saudi Arabia, because Trump truly does want to make a deal. But let's not forget, like I alluded to earlier, there is a strong desire, because of the nationalist populist rhetoric that Trump Vance ticket benefit from and came into the White House with. They will always kind of fall back on that rhetoric as well and keep pushing America first and try to look like they are in the driver's seat at all times.
Rina Shah, fantastic to have you on. Also, Jamie Smith-Mayer, and I hope to continue our discussions as developments continue on this subject regarding Ukraine. Thank you so much to both of you.